dive into a story. Um, it's got more twists and turns than a comic book plot. We're going to be talking about Superman, but not in the way you might think.
Yeah, no, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, so it's all about a legal battle brewing over Superman, and the timing is almost too perfect to coincide with Warner Bros. Discovery launching their new Superman movie.
Oh, you're talking about that lawsuit, right, from the co-creators estate?
Yeah, the one from the estate of Joseph Schuster.
I mean, the timing is definitely interesting, but honestly, what's really fascinating is the nature of the suit itself. This isn't just a typical copyright thing. We're talking international law, a legacy going back to Superman's creation in 1938, and potentially impacting whether or not some people even get to see the film.
Oh, wow. So fill me in here, like, who exactly is suing and what's the basis of their claim?
Okay, so the lawsuit was filed by the estate of Joseph Schuster, as you said, Superman's co-creator, and they're alleging that Warner Bros. Is basically exploiting Superman's rights in countries where they don't actually hold those rights anymore.
Wait, so different countries, different rights?
Exactly.
Wow, I knew that Shuster and the writer Jerome Siegel sold the Superman rights a long time ago, but wasn't it for a ridiculously small amount?
Oh yeah, you're remembering correctly. It was something like a mere $130 back in 1938,
Wow.
which, today, that wouldn't even get you a decent stack of comics.
Right.
It really goes to show the power imbalance back then, and honestly, even sometimes still today when it comes to these early creator contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of unbelievable to think that something as globally iconic as Superman was once traded for what wouldn't even get you a decent meal today. I wonder, though, do you think this case could maybe change how these sorts of agreements are made in the future? Like for new creators and studios?
It's certainly possible. I mean, this lawsuit could be a real catalyst for change, prompting studios to reconsider those contracts with creators, especially because of the insane long-term profits that characters often generate. This case specifically, though, is focused on the UK, Canada, Ireland, and Australia.
So why those countries specifically? Is there something different about their legal systems?
Yeah, absolutely. Copyright law isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It varies from country to country.
Oh.
So, for example, in some of those countries, copyright protection might expire sooner than it does in the U.S., or they might have different rules about how and when those rights revert back to the creator's estate.
Okay. So basically, in those countries, the Shuster estate has a stronger legal claim to Superman than Warner Bros. Does.
Exactly.
Wow.
And they're trying to use that difference, that advantage, to try and block the new Superman movie from being released in those places.
Hold on, wait. Are you saying this lawsuit could actually stop people from seeing the movie in some parts of the world?
That's exactly what they're going for.
Yeah.
What they're asking the court for is called an injunction. It's basically a legal order to stop Warner Bros. From distributing the film in those specific regions where there's this dispute.
So for those of us who, aren't legal experts, can you maybe give us a real-world example of what an injunction would look like?
Sure. So imagine, let's say, a bakery opens up right next to another bakery
Yeah.
that has a super similar name and menu.
Okay, yeah.
That original bakery could actually go to court and ask for an injunction to prevent that new bakery from operating until the case is sorted out, until they figure out who has the right to what.
Yeah, okay.
And that's basically what the Schuster estate is trying to do here. They want to stop the movie release until everything's settled about who actually owns those rights.
Oh, okay. So this is sounding like a real headache for Warner Bros., especially because this Superman release, this is like a tentpole release for them, right? It's coming out July 11th.
You're hitting the nail on the head. This movie is the foundation of their entire planned DC cinematic universe.
Yeah.
So if distribution gets blocked, even in just a few major markets, that could have a huge impact on their financial projections. We're talking potentially millions of dollars.
Right. So I was actually reading some comments from Mark Toberoff. He's the lawyer for the estate. He basically said that in today's world, with digital piracy being so prevalent, studios can't just expect other countries to honor U.S. copyright law if they're not willing to respect the laws in those countries, too.
Yeah, he's making a good point about reciprocity in the digital age.
Right.
It's like a reminder that everything's global now. These legal battles, they're playing out on an international stage. It's not as simple as it used to be.
So what's Warner Bros. Saying about all this? They must be fuming, right? Like having this legal challenge right before their big premiere?
You could say that. Warner Bros. Has publicly stated that they, quote-unquote, fundamentally disagree with the lawsuit and that they're ready to fight it in court.
Wow, so they're not backing down at all.
Not even a little bit.
So we've got this international legal drama, a clash between, this creator's estate and a huge media giant, and potentially millions of dollars at stake.
Yep. It's shaping up to be a real blockbuster legal battle.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we're just getting started.
Oh, there's so much more to unravel. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's just wild to think about, you have these creators, they poured their hearts and souls into these characters, and they absolutely deserve to be compensated fairly and, acknowledged for their work, especially given how much money these characters make today.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it brings up a really important point. Like, what does fair compensation actually even mean in these situations? Back in 1938, could Schuster and Siegel have ever imagined what Superman would become?
Right.
This global phenomenon, the scale of these modern franchises, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, absolutely. It really makes you think, is there some way to create contracts that protect creators' rights in the long term? Even when, the characters evolve in ways that nobody could have predicted.
It's definitely a balancing act. Because on the other hand, you have studios, right? Like Warner Bros. They've invested a ton of resources into building these franchises, expanding the stories, bringing them to new audiences. And they argue that their efforts are a huge part of why Superman is still so successful today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's true, Warner Bros. Didn't just sit on the original idea. They developed it, adapted it, brought it to the big screen, reached millions of people.
Exactly. All those adaptations, new storylines, the special effects, the marketing campaigns, all that contributed to shaping the Superman that we know today.
So it's not quite as simple as saying, Schuster and Siegel are the only reason Superman is so valuable today.
Right, exactly. It's really more of a partnership, a complex kind of interplay between that initial creation and then all the development that the studio does afterward.
I like that.
It's like, think of building a house. The architect, they design the blueprint, but you need a construction crew to actually make it a reality to build a house.
Yeah.
Both are essential for the final product.
Perfect analogy. But this case adds a whole other layer of complexity with the international aspect. Like we've been talking about, it's not just U.S. law we have to consider here.
Right. You're absolutely right. The core of this lawsuit is about how copyright laws differ between the U.S. and those Pacific countries, the U.K., Canada, Ireland, and Australia. And these aren't just small differences. We're talking significant differences that could really swing the case one way or the other.
I'm still a little fuzzy on exactly how they differ. Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. Let's talk about copyright duration. So in the U.S., copyright can last for a really long time.
Yeah.
It's often the creator's lifetime, plus another 70 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. But in some other countries, that duration might be shorter. Or they might have specific rules that say the rights go back to the creator's estate sooner than that.
So the Schuster estate could actually argue that in those specific countries, they hold the rights to Superman, even if Warner Bros. Says they own the rights under U.S. law.
You got it. And that's why they're specifically going after those countries in this lawsuit. It's a very strategic move to leverage those differences in the law and try to block the film.
This could set a huge precedent, right? I mean, what if the Schuster estate wins? That could encourage a lot of other creators to examine their contracts more closely and maybe pursue legal action too, especially with how much money these characters generate globally.
Oh, absolutely. This case could totally change the game for the entertainment industry as a whole. We could see a huge wave of lawsuits, studios scrambling to reassess their copyright strategies, and, just having to be much more mindful of all these different laws around the world.
Yeah, it'd be a whole new ballgame. And what about the fans? What happens to them if this lawsuit actually works?
That's a great question. So think about it. If different countries start having different rulings about who owns Superman, you could end up with this crazy patchwork of rights and distribution agreements. Imagine trying to figure out where you can even legally watch the movie.
Yeah, that sounds like a mess.
It would be a nightmare for studios, too, trying to coordinate releases and marketing with all these conflicting claims.
I hadn't even thought about that. So this case could really shake things up, not just for the studios and creators, but for the fans as well. It really shows how complicated copyright law can be, especially now that everything's so interconnected globally. It's a lot to process, that's for sure. Legal battles, copyright confusion, creators fighting for what's theirs, and potentially millions of disappointed fans if they can't see the movie. It's kind of a wild situation we've got here.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's a lot more to uncover as this case moves forward.
So we've talked about the history, the legal stuff, all the potential fallout from this case, but let's bring it back to the present. What does all this really mean for the upcoming Superman movie? Could it actually, like, stop Warner Bros. From having their big premiere?
Well, it definitely throws a wrench in their plans.
Yeah.
If the Schuster estate actually gets that injunction, Warner Bros. Could be looking at some major delays and logistical nightmares trying to get the movie out there, at least in those disputed territories.
Yeah, and it's hard to overstate just how important this movie is to them. It's not just another Superman flick. This is supposed to kick off their whole interconnected universe, like what Marvel's done.
Right, exactly. It's the cornerstone of their entire strategy. And if the release gets delayed, even in a few important markets, it could create a ripple effect, mess up their carefully planned schedule for other films, and potentially hurt the momentum of the whole franchise.
Not to mention the fans. I mean, there are a lot of people, especially in those countries that the lawsuit's targeting, who are really excited for this movie. Having to wait even longer, or maybe not even getting to see it at all, would be a huge letdown.
Oh, absolutely. And, it could even backfire on the Schuster estate.
Oh, how so?
Well, their goal is obviously to get fair compensation and recognition, but if they end up blocking the movie's release, it could really alienate a lot of fans and generate bad press, which in the long run could actually damage their cause.
It's a tough spot to be in, right? They need to be strong about their claims, but also be aware of how fans might react.
Exactly. It's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just about public image either. There are some very real financial consequences to think about.
Like what?
Well, international markets are a huge part of the box office for these big blockbuster films.
Yeah.
Blocking distribution, even temporarily, could have a big impact on the movie's overall earnings.
This is getting more and more intense. It sounds like both sides have a lot at stake here.
Oh, definitely. And, this goes way beyond just Superman. The outcome of this case could change things for the entire entertainment industry.
Oh, so?
Well, if the Schuster estate wins, it could empower other creators to take another look at their own contracts and maybe even file similar lawsuits. It could lead to a whole wave of litigation and renegotiations.
So this could be a landmark case then. Like, it could really reshape the relationship between studios and creators for years to come.
It absolutely could, and it really underscores how important it is to understand intellectual property and protect it, especially in today's globalized world where content can be shared and distributed so easily across borders.
It's definitely a reminder that even in the world of superheroes and fantasy, real-life legal battles are happening, and they have a big impact on the entertainment industry.
Yeah, these are the kinds of issues that we'll be grappling with for a long time to come. Who ultimately owns these iconic characters? How do we balance the interests of creators, studios, and fans in this global entertainment landscape? And what will the future hold for copyright law and creative expression? It's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Well, one thing's for sure, we'll be following this case closely as it develops. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore more stories from the crossroads of law, creativity, and pop culture.